Welcome everyone to my March 2023 webinar called The Memory Paradox. I had to pause there for a moment and remember what it was. The memory paradox has been bugging me for a long time, and I've struggled to figure out exactly what the paradox is and why it's important. And I guess I already pretty much knew what we'd do about it, but I've been wrestling with this for quite a long time, and I'm very happy to be able to present it to you this evening. Memories serve us in a variety of ways. They remind us of the past, good and bad, and they suggest possibilities for the future. If I could have this again, then I would have something else. I would have something hopefully enjoyable. That also serves as a warning to us, though. I remember that in this situation, I felt badly, and therefore, as I'm feeling like I'm getting into that situation again, I will take measures to prevent that from happening, so that I don't feel badly. So memories are very important to us, and we've often recognized that. And memories are part of how we unwind trauma that has occurred to us and is settled into our bodies. And that can be a very difficult, very challenging thing, because a lot of times we don't have access. We don't remember what it was that traumatized us. Sometimes we don't know, but oftentimes in traumatic events, we repress the actual experience. We do not recall what happened. And then we begin to get fragmentary memories, partial memories of what happened. And I was struck years ago by how important it was that people who were beginning to remember past traumas and are doing so in fragments, in little pieces, need to be believed. The problem was, and still is today, I just recently was reminded that those memories are not always accurate. They do not always reflect what actually happened to us and how we felt about it and how we dealt with it at the time. And that's because of a whole bunch of processes and experiences that come afterwards. And so the traumatic experiences, the kinds of things that produce post-traumatic stress disorders, which are behaviors which reflect the fact that stress is present in our bodies, we act those ways because there is stress within us. And so we need to be able to identify them and hopefully to do that reliably. But the problem is that our memory systems are often not adequate, not up to the task, we do not recall precisely what happened, and oftentimes don't even precisely remember who was involved. And that can be involved for ourselves. We don't remember ourselves being involved, or we don't remember the other people that may have been involved in the experience. And so all of this about trauma, I was at one point a very strong advocate of believing people who were telling stories about what had happened in the past, and then finding that, gosh, memory mechanisms are not always reliable. In fact, it's more accurate to say they are not reliable, in the sense that they may not be complete or they may not be true, but they're almost never wrong in the sense of that they are in fact related to the trauma that a person has experienced. And so when somebody says, well, I was assaulted when I was a child, and now they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s or even later, and they're just beginning to recall those things, the memories that they have, unfortunately, may not be very accurate. And so the description of events, which was probably hard to interpret even at the time, may be very, very difficult. This is not to say the person should not be believed, however, but we have to accept that our memories are not perfect. And if you think about that a little bit, it's pretty obvious. If you think about your recollection of something and you're honest with yourself, you go, well, I think it was like that. I think that happened that way, but I'm not absolutely certain. It's been too long. Certainly, as I reach or approaching my 80th birthday, I look back on things that happened earlier in my life, and not just childhood things, even as a young adult. And I can't be absolutely certain that things happened the way that I remember them. Now, I'm pretty confident that if I remember something happening, it did happen, but it may not have happened precisely in the way that I saw it. There's another phenomenon that we have to accept. Um, and that is that if for instance two people went through a traumatic experience, each of them had their own experience, even though it may have been a shared event, and each of them will have different memories and different stories to tell about what happened. And for one person it may be very traumatic, and another person may not have been that traumatic. And so the way that they recall things may be very, very different. So this is part of the paradox of memory. On the one hand, we have to rely on memory. I have to remember from day to day who I am and who you are and who the other people in my life are and what I'm supposed to be doing, and so on and so forth. We need memory. It's critical to our survival, functioning as a human being. But on the other hand, our memories are highly fallible, and particularly around areas of trauma, we can't be completely certain that the specific facts are true. Now, it occurs to me as I say that's one part of me that is longing for accuracy and truth and complete clarity about a situation, about any situation. There is another part of me, and it's the part of me that has allowed me to be a healer and to do the kind of work that I do, that allows me to function in areas that are absolutely imprecise. And that's partly because we're functioning at a quantum mechanical level, a very subtle level of existence, where things are not solid objects, and they're energy patterns or waveforms, if you will, and they don't necessarily tell a precise story. I am a little bit suspicious at times of people who say, well, I can look in and see a particular thing. And I know about that. I can do that too to a considerable degree. But a lot of times it's not that way for me. It's just a vague sense of something. And I've learned to be very comfortable with that. So there's another part of the paradox of memory, that on a gross level, maybe memory is very precise. It's about, well, this did or didn't happen, or there were so many of these things involved. I bought a dozen eggs, not 2 dozen, and I remember that. And that's probably an accurate memory. And, I can remember that it happened and trust that was true, and can remember then, therefore, the consequences of that. Oh, well, I've used some of those eggs, so there should be so many eggs left in my refrigerator, like that. So, and that's a mundane example, but I'm just using it as a way of showing how our memory processes can be very helpful and are absolutely necessary. But when we're working on the healing level and dealing with things that are in fact very subtle, they're not concrete. And so a part of me has had to get used to working with very abstract information, very not ones, twos, threes, fours, fives kind of information. So that's 2 things about memory. Now, the thing that we need to deal with or figure out is how to deal with our memories, and what to do, particularly when memories kind of dominate our thinking. and we are recalling and anticipating. There's the element of the future there too, anticipating that things are going to happen to us. And usually our concern is we ain't going to like them. We're not going to like what's going to happen. They're going to hurt, or we're going to feel lonely or rejected. We're going to feel sad. We might feel angry, frustrated, so on. So all of these negative feelings may be associated with these memories. And so we either avoid having the memories, or if we do have them, we understand that it's going to make us feel uncomfortable, and that's not a happy thing. We're going to have to go along with that. So memory is a very difficult subject. Now, in terms of dealing with memory, I put a little topic in my notes here called perpetual perceptual soup. And I'll just read you my note because I think it describes this. Because the mechanisms that defend us from constantly reliving our traumas keep us from remembering the events, feelings, painful emotions, and bodily sensations associated with those traumas. Our memories of the events often are sketchy, vague, and incomplete, lacking feeling and completely devoid of painful emotions, and recollection of the bodily sensations associated with the experience of being traumatized, particularly if the trauma is physical itself. I refer to it as soup because all the ingredients of trauma are present there, but they are all mixed up and impossible to identify by thinking about them. And this is the key thing. One of the reasons people stay traumatized and stay in their misery and suffering is that their thinking about their problems doesn't change them. It doesn't make them better. And they wind up, and you've heard me say this many times, those of you who've been with me for a while, they wind up with a story or a set of stories about who they are and about what life is about for them. And those stories are painful. And they keep telling them over and over and over. And as a counselor of people, it's kind of my job to recognize when people get caught up in their stories. And I doubt if there's one among you who are listening to this who has worked with any coach, not just me, has worked with any coach who hasn't said at some point, you're caught up in your story about this, and you don't have the freedom or the flexibility to see it fresh, see it in a new way, and allow it to change. And we certainly wish it would. I'm going to talk about another problem with memory. And we use it even in present day experience. And we say, for instance, I have an upset stomach. And when we use a phrase like upset stomach, those words, if you think about it, stomach means something in the abdomen here, usually the upper abdomen. And upset means what? See, upset doesn't describe a physical sensation, a bodily sensation. Upset is a judgment we make. The thing we're basically saying is, I'm upset about what I'm feeling in my stomach. And if we were able to pause at that moment, and pausing is very important, if we were able to pause at that moment and sense into the feeling in the stomach and come to that feeling without judgment, it's bad, it's upset. If we could just be with it, with that feeling, we would sense that there is a certain space around that. And it might be all constricted down. I was dealing with somebody with this sort of situation just this past week. And it's like all constricted down. And you could describe that. You say, well, it feels like a really tense ball of rubber bands or something, hard, pulled together like a hard ball, like a baseball. And It's all pulled in. It's in a small space. But when you put attention on it, it's as though you relax the space. The space opens up, and then the ball can begin to open up inside that space. So the ball is that bodily sensation, what it is that is there when we say, my stomach is upset. And so we start using words like tense and constricted. We use words like those to actually describe what we're feeling rather than interpreting what we're feeling. I have people who talk to me. This happens a lot. So if this sounds like I'm talking about you, I'm not really. Yeah, I am. But if this happens so often that people will be talking to me and I'll have to interrupt and say, but what does it feel like? Get out of the story of what it's about, out of the words of interpretation that we use. We all do this. Get out of the words of interpretation. What does it feel like? And use words that actually describe our experience. They do not, and they're just like memory, they do not have to be precise. They can be metaphorical, but they're helping us get a description to paint a picture of what's going on. It's not the actual thing that's going on, it's a picture of it, but we're trying to communicate here, so we have to create something that we can communicate with. In describing the nature of a traumatic experience, it lends itself to the entrapment by this paradox of memory, of taking things and interpreting them as real when they are in fact not real. We tend to speak of traumatic experience when we mean intense experience. Have you ever thought of that? When we say that's traumatic, what we're actually saying is we are reacting to that intense experience in a traumatic way. It's stressful. And we can describe that. There are things that we can say about what a stressful experience is. But the word stressful is, again, an interpretation. It's stressful because certain responses take place in the body, like we yell in pain. A symptom of traumatic experience is that we tend to think about it, recall it. We tend to recall it rather than recall how it feels in the body. And that limits our access to the impressions that this memory has made. It's what makes this memory traumatic. And in order to deal with it, we need to be able to look at the thing itself. We need to get past that, oh, that's traumatic, and go, that traumatic memory is of, and then say what you feel, what's actually there. And that may be events, but it may be just feelings. Feelings are actually more important. And the events, because we may or may not remember them accurately, they're less important. They're less important. They're also less important because they don't immediately lead to healing. When we put attention on something that's painful to us, unpleasant to us, it's hurting us, and it could be just feeling sad. If we put our attention on that, we give it a chance to dissipate, literally. If it feels that way, when we say literally, it feels as though it dissipates. And so you can say that, oh, my sense is that very tight ball, that hard ball, all knotted up, it's relaxing. It's breathing. Can you see my hands? Yeah. It's going like that. It's like pulsating with life. And it's becoming looser and looser. And the ball may get very big. That's quite okay. Now, to bring this into the practical realm, I was reading a book, which of course I took in the other room, and so I don't have it next to me at the moment. Maybe during the break, I'll go get it. The book is on treating addictions. And the thing about the addictions is that the cravings we have, they come to us usually from a story of deficiency in which we try to mitigate feelings of, and here's a list for you of negative feelings: inadequacy, not being good enough; insufficiency, lack of achievement; inferiority, there's something wrong with me; lacking, something's missing; and or boredom, lack of excitement or thrill in life. These assessments of our present status based on memories, thoughts of the past, produce thoughts about the future, thoughts that tell us a reprieve from our pain or a pleasurable high is possible. We find that transient satisfaction of our needs is a high, but not long-term satisfaction of our needs. Instead, we experience cycles of feeling down, getting high, and returning to the needy state once again. And there was a time in my life when I counseled heroin addicts, and addiction to narcotics is a perfect example of this cycle, where when a person is high, they feel really good. Narcotics are powerful tranquilizers. They make us feel good. They make us feel relaxed. I mean, if you're going to use specific words, relax, mind is at ease. There's no apprehension, no anxiety. There's a sense of all is well. And for a little while, a hope that all is going to stay well. It's going to be good. But then what happens is that the effect of the drug wears off, and we get a state where we're kind of normal for a little while, where we have some unhappiness and some happiness, and we can deal with stuff and kind of get along for a little while. And then we get into a state where the need overwhelms again. And we get into that vicious part of the cycle where we have to have a fix in order to feel good. And we're absolutely convinced of that. We're absolutely convinced of that. And I watched the addicts go through this. It was so painful to watch. Because you can't talk somebody out of that. The withdrawal from the drug is real. And so what happens is the drug actually winds up reproducing the vicious cycle itself. Withdrawal from the drug is painful. It's extremely unpleasant. And so whether it be narcotics or barbiturates or even speed, there's still that cycle that they go through that is very difficult to break away from. In order to break away from it, we have to become aware of the bodily sensations. We need to be present with sitting in silence and being present with the whatever sensations are there in the body. And while it's easiest to work with those sensations at the level of the body, that is feeling the body, we usually don't catch them there. What usually comes to us is a thought. Oh, I want to get high. And images of oneself as being high and being completely at bliss, completely at ease, totally relaxed. Or if you're talking barbiturates or speed, amphetamines, some of the other drugs, then into that state where you're happy and you're not bored and you feel good for a little while. Now, addiction itself is a very complicated process, but the key thing I think that comes out of what I've been saying is that it is possible to break the cycle. But that's not an easy thing to do because we don't normally feel our bodies. We don't feel what's going on in our bodies. We don't want to feel what's going on in our bodies because it's usually unpleasant. And so we are always in that mode of looking, remembering the good things and trying to avoid the bad ones, the down, and knowing that the way to avoid the down is to get more drug. Now, it isn't always drugs, of course. It can be food. That's a common one. It can be attention from other people. That's a very common one. But the point is that we're trapped in a cycle where we're bouncing from feeling really good and then feeling really bad. And then doing something, usually not very good for our bodies, to bring that back. Now we're on the topic of memory. And one of the things when I thought about this, I remembered the song from the show Cats, C-A-T-S, Cats. There's a song called Memory. Barbara Streisand recorded it, made a very famous recording of it. Other people have recorded it too. I was going to read you a bit of it, but it's getting kind of late. So I'm just going to read you a couple of lines from the song. The Cats version of it is more elaborate than the version Barbara Streisand did, but Barbara Streisand's version is wonderful. Not just her singing is wonderful, but the song itself, the poetry. So remember, they sang singing about memory, all alone in the moonlight. And then there's a line, I can dream of the old days, life was beautiful then. So it's that sense of going back, recalling beauty from the past and trying to live that beauty from the past in the present, as if that were possible. And then there's another verse that says, touch me. It's so easy to leave me all alone with the memory of my days in the sun. Again, that same idea that you can leave me, that I can leave myself with the memory of my days in the sun. And then it ends with, what happiness is, look, a new day has begun. So it ends on a happy note. It ends on an optimistic note that there can be another day like the previous days when I remember that I can remember were happy. I was happy at those times. But the whole song, if you really look at the song, the whole song misses the point that happiness isn't in the memories. Happiness isn't in reliving memories, although that can be fun. God knows many of us take a vacation so that we can remember, we go back to some place where we were happy at one time. And usually what we find is that there's a new reality, not necessarily a bad reality. It can be good, but it's like life forces us into the present. Presence is the key. Presence is the key. But it takes practice learning to pause, as I said at the beginning of this, to pause, to look at what's going on, look at what we're feeling in the body. Now, it's okay. We do the same process if we feel it as thoughts or we've experienced as images that we see. Sorry, forgot the term there. So thoughts or images that we may hold, we do the same process, but then we have to go deeper into that. That feels like, so we feel something inside me and it feels like, and we try to describe it more and more literally. You keep doing that, keep working that till we get that down to a very refined level where we're really describing what we're feeling. And that may even change as we're doing it because it is changing. There's a transformation taking place. And it's a good transformation. And hopefully we'll have some of that experience that, oh, it's relaxing. It's expanding. It's like it's breathing again. And then we can proceed to be in happiness. So if there are any questions at this point, we're going to stop and see if there are any questions. You can put them in the chat if you would, please. And I think everybody will be able to see them. If not, I will anyway. And in the group clearing session coming up, we're going to actually do an exercise with this, looking at our memories and see if we can't begin to develop that habit. The homework will be then to go practice that. And several times a day, just at any time, when you're sitting quietly or can sit quietly and just think for a moment, now, what am I experiencing in my body? Is there some need there? You know, we say, oh, I'm hungry. Well, what is the feeling of being hungry? You say, well, I need food. No, that's an interpretation. What is the feeling of being hungry? And if you have an eating disorder where you tend to overeat, maybe binge eating or just chronically overeating, it's a very good practice. Just noticing what's there. Oh, it's that sensation. We say hello to that. We let that sensation know that we're not trying to get rid of it, not trying to judge it. And then we go from there. And we'll do that in the group clearing session. I'm not seeing any comments in the chat, so I'm going to end the recording here.